the fans did actually say something quite remarkable to me that I never really thought about before. A young lady, and she said to me, "What did you take from the Dark Crystal?" I thought, what an interesting question. What did I take from the Dark Crystal? You know, you could say, well, it's just another job, just another gig, you know, for an actor. But I did think about that, and I realized I did take something from it which was quite unique, or almost completely unique in my lengthy experience as an actor. And that is, I had the extraordinary privilege and pleasure of meeting and working for one of the nicest, sweetest men I've ever known, and that was Jim Henson.
Yeah.
We all agree with that, I'm sure. He was the most lovely man. Very meticulous working for him. He was very, very fussy, but you loved him so much, you didn't mind. You did whatever he wanted. And I was delighted to be able to work for him in the Dark Crystal as General of the Skeksis, and also a couple of other things after that. But the General of the Skeksis was the most important thing I did for him. And I'm glad we all agree that we have the same opinion of him as a man, a lovely, charming man. What a tragedy that he died so young. That was dreadful. Incidentally, one of the first things I was asked to sign today had on it somebody else's signature, which was, I'm not going to say the name because I don't want to be rude, but he'd signed it, and underneath he'd put General of the Skeksis.
There is only one
The
general.
man is an impostor!
Tim, how about you? How's your morning been?
Oh, it's been very good.
Yeah?
I was thinking, one of the stories I tell, I've been having lots of flashbacks being at this studio, because, like Mike says, this was the canteen. And in the 80s, the food was not terribly wonderful. So one day I decided, I'm going to go upstairs, because that's where the important people had their lunch in the restaurant with the tablecloths. And I walked in the door, and the first people I saw were Jim Henson, Frank Oz, and George Lucas. But they were having a little conversation together, so I said, okay, I'm not going to butt in over there. And I looked at the next table, and Steven Spielberg was talking to Harrison Ford. So I said, okay, I don't think I'm going to try to schmooze in on that table. And at the next table, they had, it was the 3 remaining Beatles, because they were doing Give My Regards to Broad Street. And I wasn't going to go there. And I looked over at the next table, and Barbra Streisand was there with her entourage, because they were here doing Yentl. And at that point, I turned around and decided maybe I better go back downstairs and eat with my guys.
Yes, yeah, Michael, go ahead.
The story, I remember going to that restaurant and having lunch there when I started working on Dark Crystal with Gary Kurtz, who was, of course, one of the producers. And later, also Star was it the Star Wars as well? Must have been one of the richest, if not the richest persons I've ever broken bread with. But he said to me, "What do you think of Dark Crystal?" Because we'd only seen at that point the actors, we'd only seen a rough cut. And I said, "Well, I thought it's absolutely lovely, absolutely enchanting film. There's just one thing that puzzles me. Why is it that the girl gelflings can fly and the boy gelflings can't?" And he said, "Yes, we're still working on that." Yes. I said, "Well, I thought, trying to make sense of it, that it was just that girl gelflings are born with wings, and boy gelflings are born without wings." And he said, "That's it. You got it."
The entire film has been saved.
So I've saved the film. Yes.
Have you got any other nuggets? I saw that in your fan video as well. Have you got any other kind of secrets that you're keeping back from us at all, Michael? Or?
Probably something will occur, I'm sure.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, of course, I don't know whether you know this, but the original script of working of the Skeksis in Dark Crystal spoke in a language which had been invented by some professor. And it was a mixture of Greek and Latin and made-up words. And the idea was, of course, that we were Skeksis were aliens, so we wouldn't speak English. So we recorded all this made-up language, and when the film was given a press showing, a preview showing, not a press, in Washington, I think it was, so Jim told me later, they didn't understand a word of it, of course, and they didn't like it. Because what the hell are they talking about here, you know? But they didn't realise that it didn't matter that they couldn't. They weren't supposed to understand it. The plot would carry it along, but they just didn't like it. So we had to do it all again in English, which was very nice for our bank balances. Had to do it all again. But Jim, I did have one extraordinary experience where I had to. I don't know if you remember this sequence where there's this terrible feast and all the Skeksis are having a lovely time eating. I know some of the meals were running around on the tables. Yes. And I had to dip my head into a bowl of water, or like the Skeksis, I think General dipped his head into a bowl of wine probably, and he came up and that. Always desperately difficult, these things, because you come out and you can't see because you've got liquid in your eyes. And you can't see going to do that to sync with the picture. So Jim wasn't actually doing this particular session, but the chap who was with me, I dropped my head into the bowl. He tapped me on the shoulder when to come up. I came up, played it back. It was perfect. It was perfect.
So you actually did that with a bowl of water?
Whether I had a bowl of water in front of me, yes.
Yeah.
On a
That's dedication.
Yeah.
We never knew that.
So I thought, wonderful. But a few weeks later, I had to do Jim. I was working again for Jim, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I just want to do that bit again." I said, "What bit?" It's my dread. What I was dreading, having to do this face in the bowl of water, tap on the shoulder. Because after that, which I hadn't really noticed, the Skeksis, remember, had a long beak, the General, and he did a tiny little movement. And Jim wanted something, or something just on that tiny little movement. As I said earlier, he wasn't a man you could possibly get offended with or upset with, so you did it. Well, of course, this time, it took forever. I couldn't get the timing right. And there's water all over the floor, you know, I'm soaked to the skin, but we didn't to get that right, and it had to be perfect. And when you're in those enormous studios, as we were recording, I mean, it was big enough for an orchestra. You've got there's no noise on the soundtrack. It's just you know, there's no... Eventually, I go to see the film. And to me, it's all leading up to that. That's what matters. That's what really matters, you see. Yeah. So we get to this scene, and I'm getting all tense. And there's the music playing, and there's shrieking and yelling. And you get... You couldn't hear it. There was so much racket going on with the party. You know? So that big moment for me was a complete waste of time. Anyway, I'm talking too much.
It's a film about a man who puts his face in a bowl of water.
That's what it's all about, really. Yes.
When you're at home, though, you can just make the sound. So when you're watching it, you can just add it in.
Let me very quickly, closest story I have to that, I did the scientist voice after doing the puppet. And Jim had me, do you remember the scientist? He falls down the pit of fire, whatever it is, at the end and dies, and he screams. Mm-hmm. I had to redub my part 3 times. We did like a whatever the language was you were describing, and then Jim had me do a half and half version. Oh. But we didn't use what we'd already done. We did it all again. And then we did all English, and he made me do that scream every single time. 3 times. Same scream, but just for 30 seconds. Yeah.
Yes, I was actually the first that Jim tested to do Skeksis, and so the voice that eventually he accepted. Very harsh and very, because it looks as though it needs that kind of gritty voice, doesn't it? The trouble was, I discovered afterwards that my fellow actors were not very pleased with me because they had to take it from the example that I'd set.
How's your morning been, Mike?
Oh my goodness, it's been amazing seeing a lot of my old friends and new people as well, and everyone's just so. I mean, here we are, nearly 40 years on, and none of us could see 40 years ahead that we would be here now talking about the Dark Crystal. I think Jim would have just been so thrilled that we still cared about it, right? I mean, he wouldn't have known that, would he? Yeah, you know, 40 years on, here we are, and it's just so amazing. It's a beautiful thing. You know, this is the first and last time maybe this group will ever happen. That we'll all, you know, some of us we haven't seen each other for 38 years, you know.
Because we didn't want to.
Is that?
Yeah, I think we need to get the place fumigated. Yes, yeah. No, yes, the lovely Louise girl, everybody. The lovely Louise girl doesn't need a microphone.
At least we know she's listening to us.
She's listening. That's true. Well, yes, she's not signing any autographs, so yes. So we love each other dearly, as you can tell. Tim and I worked together a lot too, didn't we, back then? Both on Dark Crystal and on Return of the Jedi, back to back, basically. Well, and Muppet Caper, actually. Yeah, I forgot. So we did 3 films in a row together, working quite closely. And I always say that what I learned on those first 3 films, from 80 to 82, is all that information I'm still using now in my career. You know, that set the groundwork for everything I still do now. And you know, without Jim, I don't know where I'd be, to be honest. I owe everything to Jim Henson.
Absolutely. And Steve and Melissa, you obviously worked together when you're on set, a bit like Brian and Wendy as well, kind of a Dark Crystal
I suppose you could say that,
yeah. How was it like? What was it like?
Well, it was good because Melissa was going to be there anyway, and Jim actually hired her as not only to help me, but also to be part of the team with Kira. She was the right hand for Kira throughout the film. And so I guess it was Louise and Kathy. You were running her face, her eyes, and that. But as far as the Skeksis were concerned, we had certain people who were with us. If we were inside of the thing, we had certain people with us all the time. Melissa was one of the people who was. I don't know what do you remember what you were actually doing?
The lighted eye and
you were making
the
that eye
eyeballs, all the eye moves,
The Scientist lighted eye, which was made out of a die-cast TIE fighter from a Star Wars toy.
Really?
Yes.
I don't think I knew that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. So if this film had happened prior to Star Wars, who knows? It could have been a match.
Who knows what it could have been?
Yeah, okay.
So,
Marble.
You didn't do any Skeksis on your knees or anything, right?
You know what? I don't want to. Okay, so when we were doing the Skeksis, it was the most painful thing in my life. And I compare it to, I've heard women say that when they have natural childbirth, it's incredibly painful, but they forget the pain. That's the way I look at the Skeksis. So I very likely could have done that. I've put it out of my mind.
Yeah, I remember doing, there was a big wide shot where my guy was up on the platform, and I strapped knee pads to my knees, and I actually did some stuff like this, walking along like this on my knees. Because
That's insane.
That was the correct height for the Skeksis. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how I spent most of my days working on the Skeksis, because we had various people, the little people that were working with us, and they had the best part of the job because they could walk around. Yes. I'm on my knees being drugged.
No, it was perfect for, I mean, Mike was on my team, Mike Edmonds, and he was exactly where he needed to be, and one of the only people.
Yes.
It's like we were saying earlier, Melissa, behind every successful man there is a strong woman, as they say. On your knees.
A lot of people get into show business that way, though, I've heard.
Moving right along.
That was before the Me Too movement.
But it still must have been fun. And what other creatures, because you assisted with Kira as well, didn't you? Helping with Kira's puppet.
That was primarily what I worked on, was right hand. It was I've been taking a poll at our table today. Are you Team Kira or Team Scientist?
What's the result?
We seem to be in favor of Team Kira.
In favor of Team Kira?
Well, of course.
We actually have a fan question for this panel, and it's a very good question. It's from Nathan, and he'd like to clear up which one of you Skeksis cracked the crystal. Who was it that performed the puppet that actually, when Jen looks into the shard, he sees one of the Skeksis cracking the crystal?
That was the general, wasn't it?
Yeah?
It was Dave Gold's.
Yeah, that's right.
And it would have been Michael's voice.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So I
think-
can't remember.
I think it was, yeah, it was the general.
Oh, okay.
He was up against one of the other guys.
Yeah.
God, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
You're doing good. You're doing fine.
They all run together.
You're doing fine. I mean, obviously, being part of performing arts, you must see lots of things that are quite fantastical. But what were your initial reactions to seeing these monsters?
Melissa was telling me earlier about what good shape everybody was in. And we had to be, because the characters, they did the best that they could building them, but they were heavy and they were awkward and they were very uncomfortable. So from our standpoint, looking at them, it's like, am I going to survive this experience?
Yeah. I think the longest I was ever in one was 4 hours when we were going up to the crystal to look at the crystal bats in there.
Oh, yeah.
But I think I had the lightest one. Mine was maybe about 75 pounds. So I was the lightest Skeksis of everybody, which was very cool. But remember how hot it used to be, and with the hot lights, and we have the monitor, the TV monitors in our chest, which would also give off more heat.
A lot of heat against your body.
Yeah,
Sure.
And it took 2 people to get us in and out of those things. Remember that?
So it was always that toss-up. Do I get out for 10 minutes or just stay in?
Stay in, yeah, sit down in little stools.
Yeah.
But wasn't it amazing though? I mean, because do you remember doing all that rehearsal? Because we didn't know how to do the faces and how to make them walk,
Right.
We had to figure out, well, how do you? It's first animatronics really ever besides Yoda in Empire. And I remember thinking, how do we? How do we communicate with our cable crew to get the faces to act? And when do you blink? And how do you get those clean expressions out of these things? And snarls and sneers. And I mean, there was just so many things to juggle. It was the most complex thing ever at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was also, I feel like it was a bit of a time frame there with Yoda and those types of characters, where the style of puppetry was changing enormously to something much more subtle.
And the technology behind it too. Yeah.
And we were all trying to make these things look like they were alive. To whatever extent we achieved that, it was a lot of discovery around that time. I know we would go over to Hampstead and sit at some little outdoor cafe, and we would always I would watch people walk down the street like this to see what they really looked like from the waist up, because the Muppets walk like this,
Yeah, and that's.
But the pod people were more like this.
Yeah.
These tiny little.
And more isolated moves with the mouths and stuff.
What does a living thing look like when it really moves in the real world? I don't know. It was good in some of it. It was not so good in other parts of it. But
yeah, I made a lot of mistakes that are on film. I think I was the worst Skeksis of them all. But anyway, But we had to learn.
yeah.
Because you played the Slave Master
Slave
Skeknar.
Master, yeah.
I imagine you must have had a bit of fun kind of beating around poor little
Actually, yeah.
podlings,
Yeah.
and especially depending on who's puppeteering them on the day,
Especially
maybe.
especially then. But yeah, I was just saying to someone earlier. I had my 17th birthday on the set of on the Crystal Chamber, and I remember they brought out a Sara Lee cake for me and sang Happy Birthday and stuff. But I had this evil-looking Skeksis. He had an eye patch and a hook and all this leather and studs, and he was just so mean. And I would stick my head out the side. We had a hole. Remember, you could peek your head out. And Jim would come around the corner. Jim Henson would come around, and he'd just burst out laughing because he'd see this little 17-year-old peeking out, hello, out of this evil Skeksis. He thought it was the funniest thing ever.
Yeah.
Bless him.
And Jim was right down there with all of us too. I mean, not only was he doing Jen, but I've got a photo back there that's Jim down there running one of my cables, making a pulse happen or something. I mean, he was.
But he loved
always,
that though, didn't he?
Yeah, he was always
Jim
in there,
loved to
right?
do that stuff.
Yeah.
Michael's already talked about his moment in the banquet scene, and another fan question from John is that that's his favourite Skeksis scene. Definitely inclined to agree. What are some of your individual memories of kind of getting through that entire shot, perhaps? I imagine it might have taken a while.
I remember there was a great competition to be the grossest one.
Yeah.
props, give me more spaghetti over here, because I really want it to be flying while I'm eating. And of course, Louise Gold, she was the best one at being particularly gross with her character.
I do remember in the banquet scene, it took over. I think we started at the end of one week and we finished at the beginning of the next week. So we had a weekend in between, but we had spaghetti in the bowls, right? You remember that?
Yes.
And I remember coming back on the Monday and there was all this mold all over the spaghetti, and it's like, and it's continuity, right? We had to, they didn't. Yeah. So it was like, oh yeah, this is so good. Oh, fantastic. It was amazing. But there was also a shot that they were going to use where there was going to be a shot of all our legs, our feet under the chairs. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
and
I think we ever did that.
I think it got cut or we
do it.
didn't do it. Yeah, you're going to see all their feet and things which you normally didn't see. But yeah, that was amazing fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's a shame because we get to see them. Unfortunately, we get to see them in Age of Resistance in the bath scene, especially we see the feet. They've got a lot more kind of dynamic feet shots in there. So maybe the food was gross enough. We didn't need to see any scabby Skeksis feet at all.
I do remember that early edit. It was about, which is the one you probably saw. It was about 2 hours long, wasn't it? At least, and it had different voices on all the different characters and different accents. It was like over 2 hours, wasn't it? So it was a long film, I guess, and it had to get cut down.
Do you ever feel that your Skeksis personalities come out kind of at points?
Does anybody know an old actor named Peter Lorre from the 40s
Peter
or
Lorre,
something?
yeah.
That was my guy. He was just Peter Lorre. A really bad impression of Peter Lorre.
He was, I'm going to talk to you like this.
So I was just doing something silly that turned into something really evil.
I think they're right. There's always something of us that, when you're performing something, there's always something of you that gets put in there, whether you like it or not, right? I mean, it has to, you can't not put that in you. So whatever that thing is, you have to find that evil creature within, because we all have one apparently, so you can't deny it.
No, very true. We've also hinted on the original language that they did speak, which is fascinating, really. Personally, I do think it's a shame, in a ways, that, and that version is out there, that we have this unique language. When you did have to come to revoice it again, was it then quite difficult because you'd already kind of mapped the movements to the foreign language? So how did you kind of go about adapting that?
Well, when you do voice work, as opposed to being envisioned as a character, it can be very difficult because you've got to get so much in to getting. First of all, you've got to get the synchronization right with the beak or the mouth, whatever it is. Then you've got to get the feeling right of what you're actually saying, what you're trying to express. You've got to measure that with the sync. Then you've got to get the accent right, what kind of voice you're using. And you get all those things right, and you've lost energy. You get the energy right, and you've lost the sync. So it can be very frustrating because you in your mind, and you start getting slightly panicky. You can't you? You think, I'm never going to get this right. But dear Jim, he was always so sweet.
Go on, Tim.
Being in the Skeksis was my first experience of sensory deprivation. Because they took so long to get dressed, we were asked to stay in as long as we could. We were put into holes and then the costume dressed over the top of us. And you were pretty much completely in the dark except for the monitor. Little screen that big. Of course, the TV was that long in those days. And what would happen, it would take a long time in between some of the takes. And Jim would say, turn over, and half the Skeksis would pop into life, and the other half would just stay there limp. And they realized that some of us had just sort of drifted away. We weren't asleep, but we weren't awake either. We were in sensory deprivation.
Except for Louise Gold, who was always awake. She was always awake
right
in her
there.
Skeksis.
Yeah.
What the cameraman finally did, instead of going off for tea, he would sit there on his camera and he would just pan the camera back and forth. So we now had some entertainment on our TV screens. So it kept our brains awake until the start of the next take.
I'd also like to say Louise is the only person who was always naked inside of a Skeksis. She never wore any clothing.
just to wrap up this wonderful panel then, why do you think that the Skeksis are just so appealing? I think they really stand out as creatures, as monsters, and they're so dynamic. What is it that you think they bring, and especially for your performances?
No, they're scary. They're frightening.
They're so detailed. They are real. They're real in camera, you know.
Yeah.
They existed in the real world, real time. We'd never seen anything like that before.
Right.
They were a first. I mean, I don't know.
I think they very much have human traits.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the nicest of human traits, but wearing that costume on the outside allowed us to be not the nicest of people and get away with it, you know. So they're showing humanity, but maybe not at its best side.
And they were fun. Oh my goodness, weren't they fun? Oh, so good.
Yeah.
But everybody loves a good villain.
Yes.
don't they?
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. A big, massive round of applause. Tim Rose, Mike Kilgarriff, Mike Quinn, Steve and Melissa Whitmire. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.